Alright, fans of Tolkien lore and our marvelous subscribers, let us get into one of the most controversial topics on the Tolkien versus the Rings of Power debate stage, Halbrand. This character, devised by the Amazon series for reasons we'll explore in this video, does not expressly appear in Tolkien's works, but has an obvious inspiration within them. What comes to mind when you hear the word Halbrand? A firebrand of hell? Hell's symbol? Or simply hell on Middle-earth? His name was obviously contrived by Patrick McKay and his team with this analogy in mind. But did the show succeed in bringing such a patron of hell to life? Today, we put on our psychic Sauron hats and try to get inside the minds of the Rings of Power writers to size up Halbrand. Why did he emerge out of thin air in the middle of the sea? And how does he differ from his counterpart in the books? While we're at it, we will also foray into whether he was a worthy adaptation of the Dark Lord or not. But before we get into it, we have a small request. If you like our content, please do us a solid by subscribing. It's a small click for you, but it means a lot to us. Thank you. Who is Halbrand? I reckon we are all aware by now that Halbrand, in Season 1 of the Rings of Power series, was Sauron in disguise. Halbrand was introduced as a guy floating about in the middle of the Belagor Sea, where Galadriel found him. Galadriel, the daughter of Finarfin, one of the most powerful, wise, and beautiful elves on Middle-earth, is portrayed quite differently in the Amazon series, where she is also without her husband, Celeborn. She's instead the commander of the Northern armies, who had lost her husband in war. Overall, she seems possessed with the idea of finding the Dark Lord to great fault. With this overpowering compulsion, she abandoned her Valinor-bound ship and jumped into the sea. After swimming for a bit, she met Halbrand and a few other shipwreck survivors. Soon, a sea monster ravaged the raft, doing away with all the unwanted extras on set until only Galadriel and Halbrand were left homing on the raft. The whiff of shipping that floated with the Halbrand and Galadriel characters in this lost-at-sea setting came full circle through the season, when Galadriel goes from being intrigued by Halbrand to supporting him, and then being suspicious of him. But we get the sense that she is forever drawn to him. This is one out of a long list of lore-twisting events that the Rings of Power series has been slammed for. Anyway, on that shifty raft, Halbrand introduced himself to Galadriel in the most vague manner possible, and he remained unclear about his lineage throughout the season. Galadriel assumed Halbrand to be the fallen king of Southlands, a fairly long leap by her based on a talisman that any and every old southerner wore, and some pretentious sword moves. Certainly not enough to conclude someone a king. We were teased with some hints about Halbrand's identity during the season. He was a talented forger of metal, always discreet about his past, but nothing solid. Towards the end, however, it became pretty clear that Halbrand was Sauron, because our man began to play his part in the making of the Rings of Power. The heavy recap predating the first episode of Season 2 should give you somewhat of a gist. The writers clearly wanted some original characters to pump up the show's value for the modern audience, who are used to the likes of Game of Thrones and its spin-offs. Also, Halbrand isn't an anomaly. Arondir is also an original character. So are Nori Brandyfoot and the other Harfoots, Adar, Kemen, and many other Númenóreans. It's a sizable docket. At the present time in the show, Halbrand has shapeshifted into Annatar. Well, shapeshifted might not be the right way to put it, since Charles Vickers is playing both the characters, and everyone can tell it's the same shape. No shifting, just some add-on flowy robes and a wig. Who is Halbrand's counterpart in the books? The evil work that Sauron's avatar of Annatar went about doing in the books was sectioned out in the series between Halbrand and Annatar, with Halbrand being the elves' council when they designed and forged the Elven Rings of Power. Was Halbrand's inclusion in the series a wrong turn by the ROP Enterprise? I wouldn't necessarily say that. Adapting almost a century's worth of life and work that Annatar did on screen is challenging in a web series trying to take a linear, one day at a time progression. The creative call to divide this phase among two characters to amass the feel of a larger amount of time passing by was not an unprecedented move. After all, most adaptations resort to creative freedoms. The incredible Peter Jackson films also took cinematic liberties in how they expanded some characters and omitted others from their scripts. So why doesn't Rings of Power feel like a live-action extravaganza similar to the PJ films? The answer is very simple, but we'll come to that later later in the video. First, let us compare Halbrand in the series to the character's source, which is Anatar's initial work in the books. To kick things off, let's look into Anatar, what he actually accomplished in the Second Age, and by actually, I mean in Professor Tolkien's Middle-earth as opposed to the adaptations. Between 1500 and 1600 of the Second Age, Anatar befriended the elves. He wanted to convince them to work under him because he knew if he had the elves, the firstborns, stronger of mind and body, he wouldn't need anything else to conquer Middle-earth. Among these were the elves of Eregion. These Noldor elves hit it off famously with Anatar because they wanted to perfect their smithcraft and achieve greater heights. And while Anatar was at it, he filled the elves' ears with ill will about everyone who tried to warn them against him. Gil-galad, the High King of Middle-earth, and Elrond did not buy Anatar's Lord of Gifts story. These wise men were like, nothing comes for free, boys and girls. And coming from the High King himself, the Eregion elves would have sought to listen. But Anatar got over that hump by blaming Gil-galad for not wanting Eregion elves to have their shine. Classic Sauron, right? I mean Anatar. Same difference. Anyway, Anatar impressed upon the Myrdain elves that he wanted to elevate Eregion to the level of splendor of Valinor with the help of the rings, and they all got down to work, profiting significantly from Anatar's know-how. Among the elves, the main guy was, of course, Celebrimbor, grandson of the great Fëanor, who created the Silmarils and the Palantiri. Celebrimbor had pretty large shoes to fill, so despite his distrust towards Anatar, he eagerly took his inputs and worked on forging the rings. The 3 elven rings were completely of Celebrimbor's making, but Anatar filled his dark magic into the other rings. Around the same time, Sauron forged the One Ring to rule them all, in complete secret of course. But as soon as he put that ring on, the elves knew who he was and what he had done. Celebrimbor and the elves of Eregion hid the rings, passing them into the care of the wisest of elves, Gil-galad, Galadriel, and also Círdan. This angered Sauron, who wanted the elven rings most of all. He attacked Eregion and razed it to the ground. Celebrimbor was captured and tortured mercilessly to obtain the location of the elven rings. But even in his most insufferable, crushing moments, the elven smith never disclosed the location of the 3 rings. A real hero, as many would come to call him after that. Halbrand versus early Anatar in the books. The Halbrand character in the Amazon series took a significant detour through Numenor before he got to the ring-making arena of Eregion. In contrast, in the books, Anatar approached the elves straight up, with the explicit mission of securing their service. Halbrand's detour was, no doubt, fashioned to create drama and mystery in the Amazon show, and also showcase Sauron's cunning through Halbrand's form. In fact, the entire Numenor and Southland section of the first season, Galadriel's part in it, as well as Arondir's bonhomie with the people of Southlands, was devised by picking up portions from Tolkien's work over vastly different timelines and planting them with a host of new characters or those mentioned vaguely in the lore. Overall, the story is not totally non-canonical, as some believe, but the writer's random pop-it-all-in-the-blender approach has made for some shoddy character development and timeline confusion, and the viewers struggle to capture the underlying lore. Another thing is, by the time the idea of the rings was conceived in the books, Sauron already had a great following of men from the south and the east, but Halbrand seemed totally lonesome in the series, with the Wildmen and the Orcs serving Adar. The series showed Halbrand's entrance into Celebrimbor's forge as the trigger for Galadriel's distrust, which also aligns with Tolkien's broader idea, except that in the lore, Galadriel never trusted or hung out with Sauron in any form. She was a wise, ancient being, quite a different package from the martially sound yet fumbling in life lady warrior of the Amazon series. Gil-galad and Elrond's messengers did warn the overtly excited Eregion smiths to beware of Sauron, whereas in the web series, they were killed by the Barrow-wights, creating an added challenge for Celebrimbor. Also, it was Gil-galad who first felt Sauron's shadow rise over Middle-earth, although Galadriel was not far behind. To be fair, the showrunner may have tried to portray this by having Gil-galad spend most of his screen time brooding next to the withering tree of linden, but if we're being honest, the first season was basically Galadriel versus Halbrand. Okay, we've got to look at this Halbrand-Galadriel Galadriel contest the show is promoting. This fatal attraction, bad romance trope thrown in by the showrunner has absolutely no source. I mean, Halbrand and Galadriel damn near began dating until the second to last episode of the first season. Even in the end, Halbrand tried to coax our gal into becoming his queen. He continues to be enamored with her in the new season, likening his side squeeze, Myrddania's, chance profile with her silhouette. Okay, I'm just playing. Myrddania is no squeeze, even though we know she wishes she was. You know, one has to question the elves' wisdom in general if they're falling for him left, right, and center with lines like those. I mean, I don't necessarily think women get giddy over a dude telling them they occasionally flicker with the beauty that another, much hotter woman is fully endowed with, but that's just me. Halbrand and later Anatar flirting with the ladies is totally off lore, but okay, we can roll with it. Even in the books, Anatar was known to beguile people to achieve his goals. What it all boils down to is that in the books, the elves made all the rings of power with the help of Anatar. In the series, the elven rings are made with Halbrand's help. Could this digression from the lore be classified as blasphemy? You tell me. At the risk of getting tossed into the furnace in the comments, I'm going to say no, because it's not the original characters the show is posting up that's taking away its otherworldly appeal. It's how the writers are constructing these characters and sewing the story up that's holding it in the common fruit and nut fantasy territory to Tolkien's megapound, gold-laced Godiva lore. Was Halbrand a form worthy of the Dark Lord? Tolkien described Sauron in Of Rings and Power and the Third Age part of the Silmarillion as one who went about courting elves with a hue that was both fair and wise. The showrunner could indeed legitimize his Halbrand's jaunt in Rings of Power as an extension of this statement. After all, Sauron had taken fair forms before Anatar too, like the time he briefly bent a knee to Eonwy, the herald of Valamanwy, after Morgoth was overthrown. So, was Halbrand yet a worthy form of Sauron? To answer this question, we have to look at Halbrand's purpose within the show. Was he a thirst trap? Yes, that'll definitely make some heads turn. The rugged Halbrand would trump the cloaked and manicured Anatar look any day, depending on what you're into, of course. It also opens the doors for the show to work in some romantic angles. And man, are the writers having a field day with that or what? We've got Halbrand, Galadriel Halbrand, Celebrimbor Anatar, Celebrimbor, and the most recent Anatar Myrddania. And don't worry, I'm sure there's an Anatar Galadriel reunion looming pretty close too. Alright, aside from that, was Halbrand in there for the mystery he posed? Absolutely. The new and younger audience, especially ones not familiar with the source material, may enjoy this kind of twist, which gives the show a modern pop culture quality. Not to forget, it's all set up in the foreground of absolutely incredible production design. Halbrand feels like a part of McKay's larger outlook, which is to transform Tolkien's material to interest modern content viewers, including those unfamiliar with Tolkien's work. On the flip side, if we're simply measuring Halbrand up with Tolkien's Sauron, who he is supposed to represent, I'm afraid there is little semblance between the two. While Tolkien spawned avatars of Sauron, such as Anatar, in a beautiful visage, he became no less vicious at any point. He even created the One Ring in the time he had to spare from Celebrimbor's forge. Halbrand, on the other hand, does not give the wise or malicious vibe. He was more like just another Middle-earth dude, as Vickers, the actor playing him, succinctly stated when asked about the character. On the whole, it's an entirely different personality, incorporated with some slippery traits to rep the Dark Lord. The scene in which Sauron uses his psychic prowess to plunge Galadriel into a nightmare at the end of the first season was a great representation of the evil Halbrand was capable of, and more recent content along those lines was needed to bring the character closer to feeling like the Dark Lord. Marvelous verdict. Halbrand's claim to fame was the mystery he brought to the Rings of Power. Who is Sauron? Was the main question, and it kind of worked. While many correctly predicted Halbrand's true identity, much of the audience was left wondering, and many had their suspicions pegged on Adar. Now we are left to address one vital question. Why doesn't Rings of Power feel like Tolkien? Is it the sea of original characters, or the events from different timelines being sucked into one ambiguous time zone? Both of those things have a part in in it. But the real reason why the show continues to lose its audience is because it lacks the heart that Tolkien's stories are overflowing with. Simply put, it's shallow waters. We feel a stark lack of context for the characters. We don't understand why they do some of the things they do. We cannot feel their pain or their joy. The elves do not appear to be angelic beings of immense wisdom, more like ordinary people with wavy hair, cool costumes, and a whole directory of rash decisions. And Halbrand did not feel like the all-consuming evil he was meant to be. Even in his moments of solitude, from the flashback the current season opened with, we could not peep the intensity of the devil in his eyes. But it's a subjective thing. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Did you all rock with Halbrand? Well, that's all from us now. But hey, if you like this video, please smash the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Later, Gators!